"You're on your own now," my father said coldly, standing in his pristine home office. "We've done more than enough." I stared at the medical school loan statement spread across his mahogany desk, $298,647 in debt, the same desk where he'd promised, years ago, that he'd help me through medical school just like his father had helped him. "Dad, we had an agreement," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You promised Dash. That was before you chose surgery over pediatrics." He cut me off. "No daughter of mine is going to be a surgeon. It's not appropriate. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, 29, and until this moment, I believed that graduating top of my class from Harvard Medical School would finally make my father proud. Instead, I was being cut off financially because I'd chosen to follow my passion for surgery rather than his predetermined path for me. "Not appropriate?" I echoed. "I just graduated with honors. I matched into one of the top surgical residency programs in the country. And you'll never have a proper family life." My mother chimed in from the doorway. "Who will want to marry a female surgeon? You need to be realistic, Sarah." Realistic. That was their code word for accepting my place as a woman in their traditional worldview. Never mind that I'd earned my spot in Mass General's surgical residency program on merit, not through my father's connections like he'd assumed I would need. "I don't need to get married," I replied. "I need to be a surgeon. It's who I am." "Then you can pay for it yourself," my father said firmly. "We're done subsidizing this rebellion." I gathered the loan statements with trembling hands. "Fine, I'll handle it myself. All of it." "Don't be dramatic, Sarah," my mother sighed. "Just switch to pediatrics like your father wants. Be reasonable." But I was done being reasonable, done compromising my dreams to fit their narrow expectations, done trying to please parents who saw my ambitions as a threat to their traditional values. "I'll remember this," I said quietly, walking toward the door. "And someday, you will too." 5 years later, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting my dark blue suit. Chief of surgery interviews at Boston Metropolitan Hospital were starting in an hour. At 34, I was young for the position, but my record spoke for itself. My phone buzzed, a text from my mentor, Dr. Elizabeth Warner, "Ready to make history?" I smiled, thinking about how far I'd come since that day in my father's office. 5 years of brutal surgical residency, working extra shifts to pay off my loans, publishing groundbreaking research, and developing innovative surgical techniques that had caught the attention of hospital boards across the country. What my father hadn't known, what he'd never bothered to ask, was that I'd been preparing for this my entire life. Every late-night study session, every extra rotation, every research project had been building toward one goal: becoming the youngest chief of surgery in Boston Metropolitan's history. The same hospital where my father had worked for 30 years, passing me over for every opportunity, dismissing my achievements, and making sure everyone knew he disapproved of my choices. The interview panel consisted of 7 people: board members, administrators, and senior physicians. My father wasn't among them. As the current head of pediatrics, he wasn't involved in surgical department decisions, but his influence was everywhere in this hospital, from the wing named after my grandfather to the policies he'd helped shape. "Dr. Chen," the board chairman began, "your credentials are impressive, but you're quite young for this position. Why should we choose you over candidates with more experience?" I launched into my prepared response, outlining my vision for the surgical department, my research contributions, and my proven track record of innovation, but I also added something I hadn't planned. "I've learned that true leadership isn't about age or tradition," I said, making eye contact with each board member. "It's about having the courage to pursue excellence, even when others doubt your path." The interviews lasted all day. Between sessions, I caught glimpses of my father in the hallways, pointedly ignoring my presence. He still hadn't spoken to me directly in 5 years, not even when my groundbreaking paper on minimally invasive cardiac procedures was published in the New England Journal of Medicine. At 6 p.m., as I was preparing to leave, Dr. Warner found me in the lobby. "They're making the decision tonight," she said excitedly, "and Sarah, the board was very impressed." I nodded, trying to contain my own excitement. "When will they announce?" "Tomorrow morning. All candidates are expected to attend the staff meeting at 9 a.m. That night, I barely slept, thinking about how much was riding on this decision. It wasn't just about the position anymore. It was about proving that passion and determination could overcome prejudice and tradition. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital early, my heart pounding as I entered the main conference room. It was already filling with staff members, including my father, who sat near the front, probably expecting to celebrate someone else's appointment. At precisely 9 a.m., the board chairman stepped to the podium. After careful consideration, he began, "The board has unanimously selected our new chief of surgery." The room fell silent. I held my breath. "Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sarah Chen to this position." The applause that followed was immediate and genuine, for most people, but I was watching my father. He had gone completely still, his face a mask of shock as he slowly turned to look at me. Dr. Chen brings not only exceptional surgical skills and innovative research, the chairman continued, but a fresh perspective that we believe will lead our surgical department into the future. I made my way to the podium, feeling the weight of every step. As I turned to face the room, I saw various expressions: excitement from the younger staff members, respect from my colleagues, and pure disbelief from my father. "Thank you," I began. "I'm honored to accept this position, and I look forward to working with all of you to build on Boston Metropolitan's tradition of excellence while embracing new approaches and technologies." My prepared speech continued, outlining my vision for the department, but I added one unscripted line at the end, looking directly at my father. Sometimes the hardest part of progress is challenging our preconceptions about who can lead and who can succeed. The staff meeting dispersed, and people came to congratulate me. Through the crowd, I saw my father standing alone, still processing what had just happened. His daughter, the one he'd dismissed as unrealistic, was now his colleague, and in many ways, his superior. Later that morning, as I was settling into my new office, directly across from his, there was a knock at my door. My father stood there, looking uncomfortable. "Sarah," he said stiffly. "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Thank you," I replied professionally. "Was there something you needed?" He shifted slightly. "The pediatric department often coordinates with surgery on complex cases. I assume we'll need to discuss protocols." "Of course, my assistant can schedule a meeting." I turned to my computer, dismissing him as he had dismissed me so many times. "Sarah," he tried again, "perhaps we could discuss this over dinner? Your mother would like to see you." I looked up at him, remembering all the dinners I'd eaten alone during residency, all the family events I'd been excluded from, all the times they'd chosen their prejudices over their daughter. "I'm quite busy," I said, "lots of changes to implement, but as I said, my assistant can schedule a meeting, a professional one." He nodded slowly, finally understanding that our relationship had fundamentally changed. I was no longer the daughter seeking his approval. I was Dr. Sarah Chen, chief of surgery, and he would have to adapt to that reality. Over the next few months, I threw myself into transforming the surgical department. I implemented new training programs, brought in cutting-edge technology, and established mentorship opportunities specifically for female medical students interested in surgery. My father watched from the sidelines as my innovations brought national attention to the hospital. Surgical outcomes improved, wait times decreased, young surgeons from across the country began applying for positions in my department. One morning, my assistant interrupted a meeting to tell me my mother was in the lobby. "She doesn't have an appointment," I said. "She says it's important." I found her sitting nervously in the waiting area, looking smaller than I remembered. "Mom," I greeted her professionally, "what brings you here?" "You've lost weight," she said instead of answering. "Are you eating properly?" "I'm fine. Did you need something?" She twisted her hands in her lap. "Your father, he's not sleeping well. He's worried about the quarterly department review." I had almost forgotten. As chief of surgery, I would be reviewing all department performances, including pediatrics. "The review process is standard," I said. "Every department head goes through it." "He's never had to answer to," she trailed off. "To his daughter?" I finished for her. "No, he's answering to the chief of surgery, the same way he would if anyone else held this position." "Sarah, please," she said softly, "can't you remember he's your father?" I looked at her for a long moment. Did he remember I was his daughter when he cut me off? When he tried to force me to give up my dreams? When he told everyone at this hospital that my ambitions weren't appropriate? She had no answer for that. "The review will be fair," I assured her, "just like every other decision I make. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have surgeries scheduled." The quarterly review came and went. My father's department met standards but showed room for improvement. I delivered my assessment professionally, treating him exactly as I treated every other department head. If he was humbled by having to accept evaluation from his daughter, he didn't show it. But I noticed he stopped making dismissive comments about female surgeons in staff meetings. A year into my tenure as chief of surgery, I was performing a particularly challenging cardiac procedure when complications arose. The patient was crashing, and every decision mattered. BP's dropping, a nurse called out. I see it, I replied calmly, my hand steady as I worked to repair the damage. This was what I was born to do, what I had fought so hard to achieve. Hours later, after successfully completing the surgery, I found my father waiting outside the OR. That was impressive, he said quietly. I watched from the observation room. Thank you, I replied, starting to walk past him. Sarah, wait. His voice stopped me. I was wrong. I turned to face him. About what specifically? Everything. About you not being suited for surgery. About it not being appropriate. He swallowed hard. About not supporting you. Yes, I agreed. You were wrong. Can we try to fix this? Your mother and I, we miss you. I studied him carefully. Do you miss me, or do you miss thinking you could control me? He flinched. I deserve that, but I'm trying to understand, to do better. Understanding starts with respect, I said, not just for me, but for every woman who chooses a path you don't agree with. Can you do that? I'm learning, he admitted. Watching you this past year, you're an incredible surgeon, a better leader than I ever was. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was something, a crack in the wall of prejudice he'd built so carefully. I have another surgery in an hour, I said, but maybe we could have coffee sometime. Start small. He nodded, understanding that reconciliation, like surgery, required precision, patience, and care. 2 years later, I stood at another podium, accepting an award for surgical innovation. My parents were in the audience, not because I had sought their approval, but because they had finally learned to give it freely. My father had retired as head of pediatrics, passing the position to a brilliant young woman he had personally mentored. My mother had started volunteering at a program supporting female medical students. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Success isn't just about proving others wrong, I said in my acceptance speech. It's about proving yourself right, about staying true to your path even when others say it's not appropriate, not traditional, not possible. I caught my father's eye in the audience. He nodded slightly, finally understanding that his daughter had never needed his permission to soar, only the freedom to spread her wings. Later that evening, at the reception, a young medical student approached me. Dr. Chen, she said nervously, your story inspired me to choose surgery despite my family's objections. They say it's not suitable for a woman, but you know better. I finished for her, and now, so do they. I gave her my card, remembering another young woman who had once stood alone against tradition and prejudice. The hardest surgeries, I told her, are the ones we perform on ourselves, cutting away doubt, removing barriers, transplanting courage, but those are also the most rewarding. She smiled, understanding perfectly. My phone buzzed, a message from my father. Proud of you, doctor, always should have been. I texted back a simple thank you, knowing that sometimes the smallest incisions can heal the deepest wounds. The next morning, I was back in the OR, doing what I loved, what I had fought for, what I had been born to do. The lights were bright, my hands were steady, and my path was clear. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right, so completely and undeniably that they have no choice but to acknowledge their own prejudices were their greatest weakness. And sometimes, just sometimes, that acknowledgement can lead to healing, not just for patients, but for families too. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.